Hello, welcome to On the Mic with Mike. I am Mike Jarvis, and for this edition, I'm joined by, shall I say, Montserrat's newest author, Mr. Wendell White. Montserratian, well, you were born in the United States, Wendell, but you spent, should I say, your formative years in Montserrat. Now, you've written and published what essentially is a bit of an autobiography called Summer Baby. Welcome to the podcast. Tell us about it.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, Summer Baby is it's I wouldn't say it's a biography, it's a memoir touching on points. The second part of the title for Summer Baby is a journey, a love letter to Montserrat and the journey to my Caribbean American identity. So I go through and I talk about things in my teenage years and into college, but they're only through the lens of how they affected my identities, some different events, specific events. So I definitely leave a lot out in terms of the book. It's really then becomes the first half is Montserrat, right? How I got to Montserrat, my formative years, as you said, and then returning to the US and sort of dealing with that dash that anybody who's from another place has to deal with, right? Whether you're culturally Indian or you're culturally Caribbean or you're culturally African. When you go to England, when you go to the United States, you sort of have to deal with that dash. How do you retain what you were plus blend in what you now are based on your environment?
So, you were born in the United States. Your mom is from Montserrat, as I recall from your
And my
memoir.
father, and my
And your
father.
Okay, so both your mom and your dad are from
Yes.
Montserrat, but you were born in the United States. Take us back to that period of your life, you being born in the
Yes.
United
So
States and when you went to Montserrat and your experiences there.
summer, the summer baby part of the title refers to two things. One, that I was born in the summer. So I was born in August of 1970, and by December I was in Montserrat. So just 4 months later. And then the second part of summer baby is it refers to folks who, they've their parents have already moved and they only experience their country or where they're from via a few weeks in the summer, coming back in the summer. So I was born, like I said, in August of 1970. My mother, my father wasn't interested in being part of raising me. My mother had issues with childcare. She was working a 3 to 11 shift at the hospital. She had a landlord that was turning off the heat because he didn't want kids, as if a baby could tear stuff up. So she had a lot of issues going on, and her parents were just like, you know what, just bring him. And so that's how I got there in December 1970. And it at that time my grandmother was about 50 years old. So there are a lot of people who still believe she's my mother. Uh, and I grew up with them. She came as often as she could. And then as I got older, I started traveling holiday breaks and such until I was 8 years old. And then it became the reverse, where as soon as holiday breaks happened, I was down in Montserrat.
Right. So tell us about growing up in Montserrat. Okay, I mean, for 4 months, you're not going to have any recollection about that, but from the
Well,
time you started going to school and so forth.
so I think that's the interesting part of the book. Um, I have had a lot of conversation about growing up. So the first part and this first chapter and the second chapter sort of lays out a lot of stuff that I didn't necessarily remember, but was told, right? So I grew up in Gages, a village on the east-west road heading out from Plymouth, between Plymouth and the airport.
Yeah, I know
Uh,
Gages very well.
okay. I grew up in Gages. My grandparents were farmers. And so the first chapter is how I got there. Second chapter is just kind of who the people were around me. Um, but to skip ahead to sort of like once I got old enough, maybe 4 years old, and I was wandering, I would just wander between the footpaths of the houses nearby us. So, I'd go and climb someone's cherry tree. I'd go see what they were doing. Um, just kind of spend my days just kind of moving about. And that
Yeah,
really continued. That's how I lived my life.
yeah, just being a
I
kid,
was,
just being a normal Montserratian kid in the village, like all of
yeah,
us.
yeah. Just like, my neighbor's a mechanic. Hey, what are you doing? And I'd watch. If I get bored with that, up the street, Morris was doing body work. Hey, what are you doing? And just watch. And then we get with the boys, and we go to the gut, and which is creek, alternatively said, and look at tadpoles and crayfish, and one of our friends, their grandmother owned a bakery. So at some point in the day, we get some warm bread and maybe climb a tree and get somebody's avocado and put it in between there. And if we're lucky, some canned cheese, and that would be our lunch while we're out for the day.
You're painting a picture of a Caribbean kid growing up in a village and the sights and the sounds and the people and the family connections, which is interesting in this case and for us all as Montserratians, because think I can actually hear someone saying, "Well, who are the people that you grew up with and around?" Engages because you've also referenced those in your book, Summer Baby.
Yes, yes. So, if you're familiar with gauges, when you get sort of to the level part of gauges, there's Glenmore, which I discussed later, which was the former sort of plantation house for the Gauges estate. As soon as you pass Glenmore, there's a black tank where we'd store water for uh, emergencies when the water was off. And then the next house is the Jubries. The Jubries were my grandmother's first cousin. So I didn't know that till I was an adult, essentially. But it made sense why they didn't mind me just climbing their trees and being over at their place all the time. um, the next driveway would be Peter Cabey. Now, some people may remember Peter Cabey from working at the agricultural department or from when he played cricket for Montserrat years before that. He had two sons, Roy and Morris. Morris was a mechanic. Roy became a building tradesman. Morris left early to go to Canada. Then the next driveway was me, was a house near my grandparents, um, uh, who we called Tanti. She lived closer to the door, but what's her name again? Mary something. Her real name is Mary something, and she had her sister's two children. So very similar to me, right? Her sister had gone to Antigua, and I think maybe had gone to England after that, and she was taking care of her sister's children, similar to how my grandparents were taking care of me while my parents, were someplace else. Um, and then there were houses sort of set back from the road, so I didn't really go up into there. But next to us, there was an old man we call Papa George, and we would, he just had like one of those one-room wood houses where everything is in the one room. And what was interesting about my grandparents' house is that you could see the years of additions. In the middle of the house, my grandmother's bedroom, you could see their original wood house. That was the original wood house. And over the years, they'd built around it with cinder block. But it was humbling in a way to kind of see like this is where we came from. This is the one room. Now we have three bedrooms. We have an indoor bathroom. We have this and that. Um, versus and the old outhouse was still there in the back. So you could still see that's what we had to use.
And the
And my
outhouse is
grandfather's
what we call the latrine.
right. And my grandfather still preferred to use that versus inside. So yeah, so you go up the road. I'd skip a lot of houses, but I would play with Joe a lot and James White Jr., who's one of the leaders for Radio Montserrat right now. He's a little older than us, but he's part of the boy crew. Um, and uh, Joe's cousin Morris, he did body restoration. There's not a lot of hit accidents amongst that, but he really was just fixing rusty cars and with welding panels and bondo and all of that, keeping them going.
And you know
Um,
what is also fascinating about, what you're outlining and detailing us to here to us now, Wendell, is that this conversation, A, and your book, B, come together at a time when we are having a lot of these recollections in Montserrat, all of these, what I choose to call nuggets of nostalgia. Montserrat, the way it was, the way we grew up, especially now around the Christmas period when a lot of people would be heading back to Montserrat to reconnect with their roots and meet up again with their relatives and so forth. It makes this kind of conversation and it makes your book so much, even so much more relevant to the ongoing Montserrat conversation about the way things were and the way we all grew up.
so it's interesting that my book spends a lot of it, well, most of it in that nostalgia, but at the very end, it says, now let's be sober about where we are. And let's not let our nostalgia prevent us from imagining a new Montserrat. And perhaps, hopefully not, but perhaps it may take my generation and those older to be gone from governing for people who've not had those experiences that sort of tie them to only looking at what was. So I interrupt the nostalgia at the end with sort of a sober look at, hey, here's what we have now. This is a nation that could have, school kids learning three languages. Wouldn't that be beneficial economically across the region? Because for example, a long time ago, my no, just great. My great grandfather, Buffon, came from Guadeloupe. But we are so separated from Guadeloupe, Martinique, and those things because of language. Here we have a chance to do that. Here we have a chance with geothermal energy, of course, solar energy, of course, our abundant water sources. So yeah, I look back and I think it's important that we look back, but I think it's also sober that we look at what we have and move forward with the value of what we have.
I am going to just jump on that straight away. So, what then would be your future plans for yourself and in with or for Montserrat?
One of the things is, and we've talked about that a little bit offline, is that I've been healthcare administrator for probably 26, 27 years now. Um, and one of the things that I wanted to do when I came out of graduate school from Columbia University School of Public Health was to help developing countries with improving their um, their delivery of healthcare. And so one of the things is I'd be willing to offer my services in that capacity and also just to connect people. I've met people who were interested in helping, and whether it's providing supplies or running special surgical clinics and that kind of thing in the developing world. And I just never knew the right person to connect them with. And so that is something that I'll offer if the country is willing to take it.
I am certain that the country would be willing. Uh, well, I think I can quite possibly safely say the country is ready, willing, and in need of expertise such as yours. When did you leave Montserrat? I mean, at what point of your education were you when you left Montserrat to continue pursuing or to start pursuing your studies in the United States?
Very early, I think it was second form. Um, yeah, I
So
think
you
it was like
were a
second.
student then of the Montserrat Secondary School?
No, 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 not secondary. Second, I was about, like I said, about 8 years old. I was going to the Adventist school in Delvins, the one that's right there off the road, going to Chalk
Yes.
Hill.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
Seventh-day
so
Adventist School in Dalvins. Yeah.
yeah, I was going there. Actually, that's where I met Basil. He was going there too at the time.
That's
Um,
Basil Chambers.
yes, yes. So we were schoolmates there. Um, but like I said, what I did was I came back like as soon as school shut down, I was on the plane. And back then they had discounted fares if you were 12 and under. So I was taking full advantage of those discounted fares
So you were visiting Montserrat regularly after you returned to the United States
until
at
about
around
high school.
you
Until about
attended. Mhm.
Yeah, until about high school. Because then you have you're a teenager, you have so then my visits were more like 2 weeks instead of the entire summer. I would still come back, but 2 weeks. And then in college, similar. So interestingly, this is the most unique story ever. Um, Nicole Allen Ryan, um, Jackie Ryan's daughter, we ended up going to the same college together in North Carolina,
Really?
just happenstance. And so I would come back and we'd spend, time together when I was in college, just hanging out. But it was so surreal. Here we are. And also we had gone to the nursery school, Aunt Rita's, or Auntie Rita's in Dagenham, not in Dagenham, in Groves. So we had gone there together as well. So here we were 15 years later or so, sort of reunited at Duke University in North Carolina.
That's fascinating. That is really fascinating. So, as you are aware, Montserrat has gone through some changes. And in terms of where you grew up, what you wrote about in the book about your experiences growing up in Gages, how aware are you of the transition your village and Montserrat on a wider scale has gone through?
Well, our village is covered and it makes it hard. It's just, like if you were in Cawkill or Weeks's or something like that, there's an opportunity to drive in, or if you're in Richmond Hill, there's an opportunity to drive in and kind of see where you live and have some nostalgia there. But with us, there's nothing. And it's hard. It's an emotional thing for me. And that's how the book started. I It weighs on me heavily that I can't take my two sons to see where we grew up, to see that inside house that I was talking about that was made out of wood, to see the tree, to see the gut, to see the valley. And so I wrote an essay about what it was like living in Gages. And it covers some of what we are just talking about, just roaming and playing and, making slingshots and finding groove seeds and making bracelets and jumbie beads and all that kind of stuff, right? And I got a tremendous response from people I knew, people I didn't know, people who were from the Caribbean, people who were not. And they encouraged me to write. And I kept writing stories and just sharing them once in a while as they came to me. And then they were like, well, now we need a book. So that's kind of how I got here. I was a reluctant author, had no plans of writing a book this year. And so that's how we got here.
Now, I know that a little while back there, when we were speaking about nostalgia, you were suggesting, quite, rightly, that yes, we cannot dwell in nostalgia. We need to move on from it. But what you mentioned there about the village gauges where you grew up and not being able to go back or to take your kids back to show them where you grew up and what life was like. And you actually had to reconstruct that in a book or in a chapter in your book. In a sense, is very therapeutic. And it is
Oh,
an
absolutely.
experience. Yeah, yeah, certainly, absolutely. And it's an experience shared by many people, including myself. I grew up in Town Hill, Victoria Village, and
Okay.
when I went back to Montserrat, and you spoke about the emotional part of it. I think for the people who have been there for the many years during and after the eruption of the volcano and stayed. But for those of us who were, I wasn't there when the volcano started erupting. I was already working overseas. But going
Mhm.
back and wanting to and not being able to, even though at one time I, was seriously considering having an official escort to take me back to Fort Barrington, Peeble Street, Victoria Village, Town Hill, as we call it. Yeah, man,
Mhm.
that's some heavy emotional stuff. Heavy emotional stuff. So let's
And
continue with the book. Okay, yeah, what
and
you were
it's
saying?
one that I don't think we've dealt with as a community because we've had to go to England, to the US, to Canada, to wherever, and just move on with life, right? So we haven't grieved. Uh, James White told me that was one of the guys from Gages was listening to me on another program on the station. He started crying when he heard me talk about it, and that is a symptom of just that withheld grieving. It's and my essay was withheld grieving as well.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people will speak about closure, but to be honest with you, from my perspective, it's like the closure I do not want to have. I do not want to have that. There's certain things in life that you have to accept. You always hold out some sort of hope. Well, yes, I mean, this is nature that you're dealing with, and it is what it is. But yeah, from speaking just for myself, as I said, we're having a conversation. It's not a closure that I wish to have anytime soon. Let's talk about your book some more, Wendell. So let us look now at your American experience as covered in the book. Just give us a summary of what that entails.
So, it starts with um, that first summer that I came up, and I it was soon apparent that this wasn't like visiting for the summer. I had committed. There was actually no plan or timeline for when I was to come back. I asked for coming to the U.S. Based on an event, and that's in the book as well. And it was like a temporary event. I could have, if I didn't respond emotionally to that event, I would have probably been there a couple of years. My mother was getting married the next year, so it kind of fit. But you quickly realize that this is not the roaming that you used to do, right? You're under lock and key now. Um, you can't just wander wherever. Um, Coming to the late 70s, Bronx specifically, this was after many landlords had intentionally set fire to their properties. And so we were walking past a lot of abandoned buildings and lots with just rubble to get where you were. It was sort of, if you wanted to show a scene of, it's sort of like a post-apocalyptic scene.
Yeah.
Um, in the Bronx in the late 70s. Totally different now. Um, so there's that. And then you go to school. And what's interesting about school, you later learn that, you know, we were all from someplace else, whether it's from the South or the Caribbean or whatever, and we were all just trying to be American. And but you learn there are people from different places too. And I probably subdued my accent as much as I could. And but yeah, those, I kind of got into it, right? I was doing well academically. I was involved in church. And so I kind of got into it, but certainly as soon as I could, I was going back to Montserrat each time. Um, Moving from sort of elementary school into high school, I there's a there's a chapter called Roots and Culture, and it just talked about how we maintained our roots and culture in America, right? How much our foods were very similar, except for when ingredients weren't available. How the family parties and things that we went to were attempts to withhold culture. Um, I can't tell a Montserratian wedding I've ever been to where they didn't play Long Time by Arrow. So that is if the DJ doesn't play that, there's a problem. And then he'll do a mix with hot, hot, hot. So that's a standard, right? Um, so I talk about that, foods and art and culture and how we try to replicate that as much. And I'm sure there's a same situation for those in England. There's the local food shop. There's where the bread shop, the way you meet up after work on Friday, and you know everybody's going to pass through if you wait there for a couple hours. Um, there's a church, Seventh-day Adventist church is where I grew up. So strong Montserratian contingent in some of the Adventist churches. So from that as well. So I talk about that and um, how I transitioned. There's one point where I talked about how I sort of culturally, externally at least, culturally became Jamaican because Jamaican culture became so dominant, especially with the music, the dance hall music, and the clothes and the styles, that I was wearing that too. Now, I would never deny being Montserratian, but that's what I was wearing. That's what everybody was wearing. Even Americans were wearing that. And so I talk about
Just an
that.
interesting point of segue in that Jamaican connection that you mentioned, because in one of my own books, and one did a book on the Montserrat lexicon, the Montserrat vernacular, and in doing the research for it, one of the things I came across, well, we hear it, okay. If we are out and about, there are times that I've heard an accent and mistook a Jamaican accent for a Montserratian accent and mistook a Montserratian accent for a Jamaican accent. And then I realized I'm not the only one whom that
Yeah,
has happened to. And in
that definitely,
doing
I've had that experience as well.
absolutely, and in doing the research for the book, the Talking Strashan, I found out that the linkage, there's a historical linkage. I won't go into all of the details of that. Folks, is covered in Talking Strashan. Let us focus, however, on your book, Wendell, Summer Baby, and you have sort of brilliantly outlined there a few minutes back for us what the book encompasses and how it relates your experiences growing up in the United States and also growing up in Montserrat. I know a pressing question would be also from people who might be listening, who family them, or who he belongs to. So I know we spoke about the people you grew up with in your village. You mind telling us your mom's name? That could probably ring a bell with someone, and your dad's
So
name.
my mother's name is Venus Jeffers. Of course, that's not her real name. That's not her given name, but that's how people know her, Venus Jeffers. She used to work at the hospital for a while before she went to the States in 65. Um, my grandparents, uh, people would call him Mass Joe or Joe Jeffers. He's about 6'5". So people pretty tall man, so people would remember him. And my grandmother was Sarah or Sally Jeffers. Lee was her original name, but of course, no one knows her by her real name, which is Jane Ann. Um, at least my grandfather kind of kept something close to his real name, but neither my mother nor my grandmother did. On my father's side, um, I think they were probably all gone. They started going to England, with that sort of late 50s migration. He might have been one of the last to go. His name is Wilmot White, and his mother, Dinah White, she had lived in when she came back from the US, she had lived in Delvin, actually right behind my school, for many years. And she has another son named Llewellyn, another son named Winston. And so Llewellyn came back a lot, and he had the property there, so people might know him just from latter years coming back. So she was a Bufang, and I think this daughter, I think it's sometimes I mix these up. Thomas, either Thomas or Edward. So those are the two Bufang brothers that came to Montserrat. So she
Okay.
was the daughter of one of them. And so
Well,
every buffoon is my relative.
exactly. Listen, we always tend to say everyone in Montserrat is related to somebody else in Montserrat. Well, that's your Montserrat connection confirmed and totally legit. Um,
Yes.
Congratulations on the book. Thanks for having me involved in a even a small way in the production of it. As I said, by profession, you are trained in public health policy and management skills that Montserrat would certainly love to have from another Montserratian. So we hope in time that things work out and you can make your skill set available to Montserrat. How the book being received? I'm getting the impression that it's being well received. I can tell you that from my perspective as well. A fantastic piece of
Yes.
work, and is as part of this renaissance of writing and publishing that we see happening in Montserrat. And we spoke a while back about it being therapeutic, and a lot of it having to do with that overall Montserrat pre-volcano, post-volcano experience.
Right. And I hope to be, part of a groundswell of writing, if not writing, sharing of those stories. I would love to be a curator of such, of a book that has stories from every village in the evacuated zone, so that every village, as much as possible, is represented. And that would be, I think, would be a great volume to just have in our libraries for posterity. That'll be a lot of work, but that's a dream of mine. The book is being received really well. It just became available like 9 p.m. last Thursday, the 14th. No, no, that's not the 14th. The 11th, and in the Kindle form, and by the 12th, the soft copy and the hard copy were available both on Amazon. Um, Folks are reading it. Folks that I really respect as writers, especially, are reading it and telling me really good stuff. And especially yourself, people like yourself, got public figures like Fiona Compton, who runs the Know Your Caribbean Instagram and Facebook platform with over 400,000 followers, giving me a recommendation. So received really well, but most people are just getting it. I think the first book landed in another distant cousin's hands on Sunday, and she had it even before me. She's in the UK and she had it before me. And people have gotten it now Tuesday, and there's going to be another group of people that get theirs Thursday. So even from the first pages people are reading, they're like really good stuff. Makes me want to read more. So I'm really proud of that work and that it's had that effect on people.
Well, congratulations to you. It's a fantastic piece of work, and I wish you all the best in all your endeavors. And I can say, in some way, we want to get your skills in public health policy and management back in Montserrat at some point. Thank you very much indeed, Wendell, and I wish you all the best.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.